I'm David, and I'm not alone. Back with the God who's on the throne. Bring the heat back with a slingshot, these stones. I got no time for this nonsense. About to knock you unconscious. Already heard the prophecy, and one day I'll be king.
Hello and welcome once again to Teaching Through the Bible, as we prepare to dive into the book of Samuel. Now you may notice, I did not say the book of 1 Samuel. I did not say the books of 1 and 2 Samuel, but the book of Samuel. And that's because originally, this was one book. This is the same for 1st and 2nd Kings. This is the same for 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And this was originally one unit, one literary work that was split in two. And a lot of that is practical purposes. So if you are familiar with the VHS, many people won't be these days, but I have one right here. VHS came before all the digital age where we have everything streaming, where we have, before that we had Blu-ray, before that DVDs, and before that VHS. So a videotape that you'd put in a VCR, play the movie that way. And this could only hold so much. It couldn't hold as much as a DVD or a Blu-ray or streaming service. So you had even some movies, Titanic being an example, where you couldn't fit it all into one tape. You had to put it on two. This is not the only form of media that this has happened with. We've seen this in video games as well. As I'm recording this, currently the Nintendo Switch 2 is the most recent Nintendo video game console. Before that, you had the Switch 1, then before that you had the Wii U and the Wii, and before that, early 2000s, the GameCube. Now the GameCube could have used a DVD-like format as PlayStation and Xbox chose, but instead they chose this, design it this little way that only has room for a mini disc, this disc is much smaller than your normal DVD disc, and they had their reasons for that, but one of the downsides to that was it didn't fit as much in there. So you had some games, I believe Tales of Symphonia is one example, where you had to have two discs. You'd play up to a certain point, and then you'd have to switch out the discs because you couldn't have the full game on one of those tiny discs. Well, back in the BC era, then you have these Old Testament books being written, and they didn't have books. They were not books at the time. They had scrolls, and scrolls were much more limited. It was easier to just have two scrolls than to have this one giant one. Now, you could make a bigger scroll, but that's just a little more unwieldy and just hard to practically deal with than if you just have two smaller scrolls. So Samuel is one example, Kings being another, where they took those two scrolls from the one. Where they had one, they split them up at some point in the process. And it wasn't until the New Testament came around, when the New Testament books were being written, that's when books, or if you're looking this up, historical terms, codices, when those began to appear. And it's even debated, is it possible that the Bible, that the New Testament works, those being written, that's what precipitated the creation of books, of codices. There's some debate on that. It's not sure one way or the other, but those happened pretty much at the same time. The New Testament works being written and the invention of the actual book. Now, with books, right, you have this traditional book, right? It's got the spine, it's got all this all attached in a certain way. It's not a scroll. It's very different from that. This can fit a lot more into it. I mean, it's the whole Bible. It's got every book, right? It's not just both parts of Samuel. It's everything in there, right? So that's why I refer to it as the book of Samuel. Of course, when referencing different passages, like if we're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 2, then then obviously we need to reference it that way, because that's the only way to know where is it in the Bible. I can't just say Samuel chapter, add the chapters from the first book and then to the second. We're not going to get into all trying to make it one as far as references or anything like that. Just making sure we're all on the same page as far as looking at this as one literary work, Book of Samuel. Interestingly, though, the Book of Samuel is not written by Samuel. So in the New Testament, you'll have stuff like the Gospel according to Matthew. Well, that was written by Matthew. You'll have things like that where it's got the name, and that name is because that's the author. This is not the case with Samuel. We actually see before the end of 1 Samuel that Samuel dies. He's not there for all the rest of the work of Samuel. So it wasn't him that wrote it. We don't know who wrote it. Traditionally, it said that people who were prophets at that time period were the ones writing it. The most important thing, though, is not how did it come to be, who was it that wrote it, but that it did come to be, that we do have God's word here, and that we can study it. And so, as we look at the book of Samuel, let's remember where we are. We've already gone through the law in the last class: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That is when God brought his Old Testament covenant to his people. And now we're in the covenant history section. Now this covenant history section, that is telling us how did God's people respond to that law, respond to the covenant. And we've seen that in Joshua, we've seen that in Judges. When Joshua was a great leader, and while he was there, for the most part, things looked pretty good. Still had some bumps in the road, but for the most part, we're looking kind of promising. Judges, go look at those videos. Totally, they tanked. It was not great. Israel continually, repeatedly, what does it say? They did what was right in their own eyes. They didn't have the leader. And when God did send leaders, when he did send judges, they rejected those judges. And God's judges represented him, and they said, nope, we don't want God, we don't want those judges. Even though God's people would, for a time, in a specific way, follow the judges. As soon as the judge is gone, they're right back to where they were. We saw that whole cycle over and over. And so here, we have come to the end of that time of judges. Samuel actually is called a judge. So you could think of him as the final judge before we move into the period of kings who rule the whole nation of Israel. The judges weren't necessarily all ruling all the parts of Israel. Some of them were more localized. We talked about that back in those videos. But they wanted someone to be their leader, someone to be their king, because throughout Judges, Israel recognizes their need for a king. The part that they're missing in this puzzle is that God is that king. They've rejected him as that king, so they see the gap, they see the need, and they're trying to fill the need in other ways. And so we're going to see that in the book of Samuel. Brief outline here, trying to keep it simple. Samuel, Saul, David. So it starts with showing us Samuel coming into the leadership role, and then transitions into Saul, and then transitions to David. And that's, you could have a much more detailed outline. You could have a different kind of outline. A lot of books in the Bible, I think you could have several equally good outlines. There's some that's pretty clear. You have Psalms. It's got book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. It's labeled that way, pretty clear. Genesis is another one that's got, I think, a pretty distinct outline. You can go back and look at the beginning of Genesis videos for that. But a lot of books of the Bible, you can kind of divide them up different ways. So I'm not saying everyone has to have an outline exactly this way. If you read someone that has it kind of organized differently, might be totally valid. But we're keeping it simple with Samuel, Saul, David. And with that outline, thinking of Samuel, Saul, David, what's the theme? What theme are we going to look at? There's a number of themes through the book of Samuel, but we're going to see God's coming king. This is setting up for the great king. The greatest king they have in the Old Testament is David. He's the one, later on, everyone else will be measured by how they compared to David. Were they a great king like David? Were they a terrible king? Not like David. Were they a great king like David, except in this, and that kind of thing? They're all compared to David because David is the best king. He is the guy, and he's the one that's coming, and this is what's setting up for that and leading into the Davidic rule. And so that is a big theme of God's king, the one that he has chosen coming to rule his people, which of course, hopefully that sounds like what we'll see in the New Testament. Hopefully that sounds a lot like when Jesus comes as the true king that David points to. So that's where we're at in the Bible, our outline, our theme. That's where we're at with Samuel. So starting next video, we'll start in the first few chapters and we'll look at how the book of Samuel starts out and how we can learn more about God's word and about Jesus. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.